But we're going to start with big picture thoughts as we look at the quarterfinal games as a whole. So if you look at the bracket, one thing that immediately jumps out are the teams that advanced are seeded 5, 6, 7, and 8. None of the top 4 seeds advanced in this round. They were all conference champions, as was Clemson. Clemson got knocked out in the first round. So no conference champions. And it does include Notre Dame, who can't even play for a conference championship. But there is going to be, I think, a broader conversation about the seeding. I have said this, I've reported it. Everyone's expecting there to be a conversation with the commissioners when they meet. They meet the morning of the national championship game, and then they meet again in April where they do kind of like a debrief for the full season. Everyone does expect them to talk about the seeding issues and you know, kind of how it shook out. Certainly, we've talked about it with Oregon and the fact that they should not have had to play a team as good as Ohio State as early as they did with the way that the actual rankings shook out. But one thing I'll say on this, and we can get into it in a second, is just that any decisions to change this for next year have to be unanimous. 2026 and on, it does not. But like, Joshua, if you are the Big 12 or the ACC or any of the Group of 5 conferences, I don't know why you would agree to get rid of buys for conference champions. Your teams are going to be lower in the rankings. So if you agree to this, your teams are never going to get those buys, probably most years. It would take kind of a certain circumstance for that to happen. So I don't know. I think a lot of people are acting like this will be a formality, that they'll go 1 through 12 in the rankings, and you know, Texas and Penn State would have gotten the buys this year. I don't know. I just want to put that out there. But I do think this is going to be a huge conversation, the fact that none of the conference champions are here in the Final Four of the bracket.
It is an intriguing thing about how they need it to be unanimous. And I totally agree with the idea that if you are, you know, the power brokers in, as you mentioned, Big 12, Group of 5, ACC, that you wouldn't want to change it. It also, again, feels like it's not this idea of keeping first things first, which is we have to structure a postseason that would do the best job it can of crowning a champion, right? Like, I get that they have to protect their interests, but like, if you're not one of the best teams, you certainly don't deserve to get a bye because you're a conference champ. And I think us as fans, we were going to be frustrated by that if that's not something that will change. And I don't anticipate it will, for all the reasons that you put out there. I think this second round was the example, though, of the flaw in the structure of this thing. The idea that you had the at-large teams that were the ones that were able to have the most success, and had it been seeded properly, maybe these games would have looked a little bit differently. Maybe the paths would have looked a little bit differently. Maybe you get some other teams that get to advance to the semifinals. So certainly I think that I'm more comfortable with this postseason structure as we've gotten closer to it. I still think 8 would be the right number. I know that's not going to change. But one thing I do feel confident about is that the right teams that were playing in the second round were ultimately the teams that got to advance. I think they were the better teams that did the things that they needed to do to win the football games.
I agree with that. So here's one thing, because people, and we can talk a little bit more about kind of the rust versus rest piece of this, because people are absolutely going to make a lot out of that. I think it's going to be a big offseason topic about the amount of time that those teams that had the first round buys were actually off. But to me, the teams that were favored in these games won, right? So for 2 of them, when we talk about seeding, we've been using Boise State and Arizona State as examples for that, where they were double-digit underdogs and they were the higher seeds. Well, the lower seeds won those games, but those were the teams that we expected because they were the 2 top at-large teams. Now, Texas, like, that was dicey, right? Like, that took one play. They had 4th and 13, and that was their season on the line. But those were teams that were expected to advance. And so to me, that's different. That actually brings the seeding question even more to light, because they should have been the higher seed in that game because they were ranked well above the teams that they were playing. But because they had to be conference champions, that's why it shook out. That's why there was a 3 next to one of them, a 4 next to the other. So that's where, like, I do think that stuff would have been fixed. Oregon would have probably, if Oregon was going to win a national championship this year, they probably were going to have to go through Ohio State, but they wouldn't have met them this early because Ohio State was seeded 6th. So you would never have had the number 1 seed playing the number 6 seed in the quarterfinals. That's not how brackets work.